All right, today we are still in the lesson, part 3, the Greeks. We have not finished that yet, although you did pick up this morning part 4 of the Imperialists, the Romans. The Romans are not long, but this has been the largest section. In fact, I already knew after I'd written it and started doing the PowerPoints on this with the Greeks incorporates the same amount of time as the Babylonians, the Persians, and the Romans do. Because it's under their empire that everything is up for grabs. All sorts of changes hit. All sorts of stuff that we've known that spills over into the New Testament. And what we read there is coming out of the Greek Empire, out of the Hellenistic Empire. It's the same thing. And that is what we are looking at, and we're finishing up. There's some really major stuff coming down the pike today, and there's a good chance we'll finish the Greeks today and jump into the Romans. If I don't finish, we are definitely finish it next week and into the Roman Empire, and it will move quickly. A couple of weeks from now, we'll be into the books, and we'll be rolling along real well. Okay, let me get this correct. Okay, here we go. All right, we are dealing with dreams and daring, and I call the entire section of the 4 empires, the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, the Greek Empire that we're in, and the Roman, as the 4 imperialists and governments bringing us into the New Testament. The Greeks had hold of everything, and their empire was basically 130 years, 35 years in length. God used them to establish the language. The known world would speak Greek, and the New Testament was written in Greek, and they would write it. It would be written, and we would get the Septuagint. They would have the Old Testament translated into Greek, so that then we would have the entire Bible, per se, in the common language of the common people. And everybody could read it, and everybody could have it, not just listen and somebody read a scroll and say, this is what's said here. Look, you can get it for yourself. It's such a pleasure that because of that, we walk around with Bibles and we can check up on what the preacher says and what I say, and we can read and find out God's blessings for us right out of His Word at home. Carried around with us, it's recorded, it's everywhere. You can't get rid of the Word of God. You know that the government could burn, the world could burn every written Bible that exists, and they haven't gotten rid of it. Because it's in the air. And it's in the clouds. It's everywhere. And it just gets pulled in. Fred King teaching another class, and was in the copy machine room. And all of a sudden I was looking, he's copying stuff, and I was looking. He wasn't feeding anything in there. He put a stick in the copy machine. And it was copying what it showed up on the thing. It'll copy this, this, and this. And I say, what technology? It's incredible. Totally is. Okay, let's move along. At first, under the Greek Empire, we look very quickly at Alexander the Great. We look quickly only because he came and went in 10 years. He died. He conquered the world and he died. And left behind the Greek Empire and the beginning of the Hellenistic lifestyle. When he died, over the next couple of years, his 4 generals peacefully, at this point, divided up the empire into 4s. The top 2, Ptolemy and Seleucus, the Ptolemy Empire, we'll call it that, comes out of the Alexander, the Greek Empire, was mostly northern Africa, Egypt, and coming up along around the Mediterranean, and it ended at Israel. And so for a number of years, the Ptolemies, and we've looked at this, had Israel, and we looked at what went on. Then, last week, we saw that the Seleucids, which had the northern border of Israel, and swept almost over to India. Vast empire, but mostly a lot of desert, a lot of just wilderness areas. And their headquarters was primarily right up the Mediterranean in Antioch. So they were sitting, Israel was just in the middle. Israel was like an Oreo cookie. It was just stuck in there, and they were the icing, and the Ptolemies and the Seleucuses were the cookies. And after a while, the Ptolemies, and we looked last week, lost the empire, they fought, and they had to give up Israel to the Seleucid Empire. And so let's move on. I'm giving you a new slide while I finish talking and bringing you up to date. The Seleucids, all of this time and most of this time, Israel could live freely, could come and go, could worship it. The temple is still standing. The walls are still up. They could, as long as they didn't upset the apple cart and revolt and go against the king, the empires, whether it's the Ptolemy king or the Seleucid king, they left them alone. But what was infiltrating into the culture of Israel was the lifestyle of the Greeks. And in every generation that passed by, it just watered it down just a little bit more. And that's exactly what happens. If we don't stay sharp on the Word of God, the next generation doesn't absorb it and doesn't come up to that level. They don't get it. And you just start to lose it. And so you have to be constant and vigilant in the Word of God and sharing the Word of God and teaching it. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose it. Okay? So God used the Maccabee. I got to get up to this, though. Sorry. One of the Seleucid kings finally dropped down to the fourth one in that line, and his name was Antiochus Epiphanes. He, at first, was a good king. And what kept him in line was over in Egypt, over in the old Ptolemy Empire, there was a couple over there that they just kept the balance together. And who ruled over there was a woman by the name of Cleopatra. That was Antiochus Epiphanes' sister. And so you had the family as long as there was a balance. But when Mark Antony and Cleopatra were killed and died, Antiochus Epiphanes lost that buffer, lost that balance, lost that person in his life that made the difference and kept him sort of sane. And he went crazy and he went berserk. And he came back to Israel, blaming Israel, saying Israel, and he went through Israel. He came into Jerusalem, we saw last week. He killed 44,000 Jews. He started knocking down the walls, burning buildings, things like that. And he didn't destroy the temple, but he went in and he took a pig and he offered it upon the altar and desecrated the entire temple and kicked the Jews out of there and made it mandatory, a whole list of things, that the Jews could no longer worship Jehovah God, that they had to worship mainly Bacchus, Antiochus's god, personal god, and all of the Greek gods. And if they were caught worshiping Jehovah, they were killed. And so what was I can live with you becomes you will live under me and you will do exactly what I say or you're dead. And he had the power and he would do that. And so the word went out through Israel that all of the tabernacles and all of that had to institute sacrifices to the gods, offer pigs. The Jews had to go to the heathen temples and worship the gods that were there. And what this happened is this brought in the Maccabean resistance or the rebellion. This only lasted 33 years. This was not long. And so God used them to establish self-rule once again. What came out of the Maccabean rebellion? These two things came out. First of all, the leader of it, Mattathias, was the dad. He was a priest. I have this up on the thing, and you have it in your notes already. But he already believed in one God. He believed in Jehovah God, but he would call the nation back to God. And he was a strong, strong-willed man, and he would call people back to the Lord, that hear, O Israel, your God is one God, not a bunch of gods. The second thing he did, he gave them hope, because he would start to preach and saying, if this is going on, our Messiah has got to be near. And guess what? We're getting in with about 130 years this side of Jesus. How close? How close we've got this countdown, and it'll be really low by the time we end this today. So let's move on. Continuing on with Antiochus Epiphanes, he moved towards, I'm reviewing, total pagan gods. Antiochus began only pagan worship, only his sacrifices were legal. And when one of his authorities he sent out the group to spread the word that this is the law of the land, when one of his authorities entered a little town called Modin, 10 miles north of Jerusalem, he would meet with severe resistance. In comes Mattathias Hasmon. Okay, now let's get something down here real quick. This is a learning moment. You'd say, oh wow, I get to learn something today. I am thrilled for you. Okay, the Hasmonean era is a word extended or called out of the Hasmon tribe or family. The Maccabees, you don't see Maccabees up here. Really his name is Mattathias Maccabee Hasmon. He's out of the tribe, a larger group of the Hasmoneans, but his family are Maccabees. Okay, are you all right with that? Do you got that? You don't have that. Okay, here we go. Let's make it easy. This is all Jubilee class. But within my class, they're still part of Jubilee, but this is the super cool table. So we call them the Kulineans. Okay? And the Kulineans live in this area around Modin, and this is the families come out of there. They have kids and they have grandkids in there. But see now, over here's some Jubileans over here. Jubilites. Ah, that's better. But they're another tribe. They're another family that makes that up. That's what this is. So the Maccabeans were one table in the class. But they were a strong table. Okay, note. What I'm going to teach you right now is not in the Bible. You got that? Because that is the book for us. There are references out of the Apocrypha that pop up every now and then. But remember, the Bible was mentioned first, or the Old Testament's intact already, and only a smaller portion of the Apocrypha was written before the New was done. It spills over into the New era too. We're coming to that, and we'll sort that out. You'll just be thrilled that time. However, the story of the Maccabeans and their revolt primarily comes out of the Apocrypha. And guess what? The books, 1st and 2nd, the Maccabees, the 1st and 2nd books of Maccabees tell us about the Maccabeans. Oh, I love this. This is so good. Okay, who is this guy? He was a priest. Mattathias, hang on. Yeah, Mattathias was a priest, the priest of Modin. He had synagogue there. He had 5 sons. He was very outspoken, and he watched the lives of his people being ruined by Greek Hellenism and pagan worship. He just got fed up with it and said, this is stupid. My crowd, my class is going over here to these idols. He didn't like it. His 5 sons, in succession and in order, from oldest to youngest, is John, nicknamed the Holy, Simon the Guide, Judas the Hammer. He's sort of cool. I like Eleazar, the Beast Stickler. Oh, I want one of them tools that you walk around and just stick beasts. And I could see him just having sort of a little prod, walking behind an ornery donkey or something that doesn't want to move, and he sneaks up and he goes, ding, and the thing bounces up in the air and all sorts. Oh, well, forget that. You're going to think I hate animals. All right, let's move on. Then there's Jonathan the Cunning. These 5 are the sons, not the brother of Mattathias, but Dad started it all. When the agents of Antiochus IV came to town to ensure worship to the pagan gods, Mattathias he was offered a bribe to lead the people out of the synagogue into, hey, nobody's getting hurt here. We just all need to be one big happy community here. And the law of the land is now just to peacefully come over to the temples of the gods and you can worship there. We're all one happy family here. And he yelled, and it's a quote out of Maccabees, "We will not listen to the message of the king," period. He announced that. Question?
I got lost. Who is the king at this point?
Antiochus IV is the king right now, yes. Antiochus Epiphanes is the king right now, the fourth.
I thought Epiphanes came after the fourth.
Antiochus Epiphanes IV is king right now. Okay, the guy that went in the temple, yes.
Is Matthias the descendant of, is he a Levite descendant?
Yes, he still is. Okay, he is a Levite. We have still, the priesthood is made up of the Levites. It's coming up, it's going to change. Okay, so what happened is this, a Jew wishing, one of his flock, wishing the king's favor, ran into the pagan temple and offered a sacrifice. Mattathias saw him do it and said, that's it. And so he killed the Jew for doing that, and he killed the king's representative. And then he called his boys together. They gathered up their possessions, and he called the town and the people and said, follow me, we're going out into the mountains, and we're defending, and we're calling Israel back, and we'll fight. And he was bullheaded. And this is the wilderness that they ran out to. This is picture right outside of Modin. So they would roam those hills and fight off the Seleucid Empire, the soldiers of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and call people back to the Lord. At age 145, he accomplished all of the above. He died 1 year later. Mattathias died. He had 1 year. That's all he had from when he did that to stand for the Lord. But look at the course that he changed in 1 year. Look at what he did. His actions inspired the nation of Israel to stand for God, His word, and His people. Over the next few years, the band of revolutionaries he founded would fight a guerrilla war against the Seleucid forces. Antiochus Epiphanes IV, his army. And they would defeat far greater armies in number, and they would win. They would fight them. When he died, his oldest son Judas took over leadership, and his bravery would earn him the hammer. And I'm moving now, and this is big time with this guy. Judas would win many great battles. In 164 BC, in 164, all of what I'm going to share with you, a year's span, is going to happen. It's incredible what he does. He goes back and he attacks Jerusalem and kicks out the Syrians, the Seleucids, and he pushes Antiochus Epiphanes' armies, and he just takes the temple back, and he casts out they brought in the Greek idols and set them up in God's temple for people to go in there and worship. And he just cleaned it all out. Anything to do with pagan gods was taken out and thrown away and dashed and got him out of the temple. In the same year, upon the cleansing of the temple, he and the nation, he brought the Levites back in, they prayed, they rededicated, and he called the nation back to God as his father had been doing. And upon cleansing the temple properly, they decided to have a celebration, and it was called the Festival of Dedication, or the Festival of Lights. And what is it called now? Yes, this is where Hanukkah comes from. It comes out of there. It would be a festival of 8 days. Look at the menorah and how many candles. It would be 8 days. Let's move on. The Maccabees never called it Hanukkah. Never. They called it the Festival of Lights. Thus the menorah. When Judas Maccabees took back Jerusalem and the temple, he found one dedicated packet of oil that would last 1 day. The temple had a surplus. First of all, the oil extracted from the olives, they would go through a process where it would be dedicated for use in the temple, not daily use in my house or your house. And so that went through that dedication process, and they would have it in surplus, and it was never really a problem of having oil for the lamps of the temple. But when the heathen were in there and the idols, there was no dedication, there was nothing spiritual going on. And so when the temple was rededicated, they found out that if they were going to have a holy, I'll use the word holy, a holy dedication for the Lord for 8 days, they needed 8 packets of dedicated oil. They had 1. And so they lit it, they dropped it, they had the lamp, and it was a flame, and they watched it, and the one, while the other they issued the order, let's get some oil in here and get it dedicated. It takes 8 days to do that, by the way. They found that lasted 8 days. The 1 packet, not just the one for the burnout. You say, do you really think that happened?
Yeah.
Well, it's not in the Bible, but I think it did. I think we have a powerful God that He's not worried about, a packet of oil. God can, if Jesus could take bread and pass it out and have tons left, God could do wonderful things. But I'm not going to argue the point with you. Yes?
I believe the Bible says that God did a lot of miracles that are not written in the Bible.
Yes.
This is
Oh, there is. God did lots of things that...
Historical description of one of them.
Yes. God did lots of things that we don't even know about. Even John came down to the end of his gospel and said, if I had all the ink and all the books of the world, he said, I couldn't write what Jesus did and the lives He touched. That's immense. That's huge. Hanukkah beans, by the way, to dedicate. Yes, sir, Joe? Where's the Ark of the Covenant? It's in the temple. I don't know. Okay, it's a good question, and I didn't get into the emails, but I will this week. I'll try to. Okay. Actually, you want to know where it is? It is in Washington, D.C. in a warehouse. That's a fact. It says top secret on the box. If you don't know what we're talking about, it's the movie Indiana Jones, the first movie. And Raiders of the Lost Ark. So that's a good question. Let's move on, and I'll try to answer, and I may have to say I don't know next week. This is a top view of a Hanukkah oil lamp found in Jerusalem about 100 years ago. You can see the oil's poured down in there, and then it's lit. They can carry it in their hand. It just lays flat in your hand. It's not big. It's not big. It just can carry in your hand.
Interesting, there's 8 holes.
As the years and decades would pass, the celebration of the Festival of Lights would be great. It would light the entire city. And it seemed like revival, and the Lord has come back to Jerusalem and under the Epiphanes empire, and the Maccabees are keeping them away and getting stronger every day. 190 years later, a man would walk in this exact spot celebrating this same festival. He'd speak these words: I am the light of the world. He that followeth me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of light. Jesus celebrated the Festival of Lights. He celebrated Hanukkah. And a year later, he would be back in Jerusalem, and he'd be celebrating the feast again for the last time before going to the cross. And he said these things, and listen to what he said. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, or the Festival of Lights. It was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple on Solomon's porch. This is the temple, and this is the blue arrow is the Solomon porch area. That whole dark brown thing, that's Solomon's idea and construction, and that's called Solomon's porch area. Jesus, when he cast out the money changers, if you're looking straight on the top of that era, not where it's pointing, that bank of columns on there, that's where the money changers would be. But this is where Jesus was walking. Then came the Jews round about him and said to him, "How long do you make us doubt? If you be the Christ, would you just say so? Tell us plainly." Jesus answered and said, "I told you, and you didn't believe me. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. But you believe not, because you're not my sheep, as I said unto you. My sheep hear my voice, I know them, they follow me. And I give them eternal life, and they never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand." What a testimony. Your salvation isn't you, it's not you hanging and me hanging on to God. We're in God's hands. He's holding on to us. We're in God's hands, and nothing can pluck us out of God's hands. "My Father, which gave them me, is greater than all, and no man able is to pluck them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one." Wow. Actually, the Greek, in the purest sense, reads this way: "I and my Father, one." There's no R. I and my Father, just one. One. Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. And Jesus answered them, "Many good works I've showed you from my Father. Which of those works are you going to stone me for? Which of these miracles that I've done? Pick one of them that's wrong. Tell me, why?" And the Jews answered him, saying, "Not for good work we stone you, but for blasphemy, and because that you, being a man, makes yourself God." We move on a little bit. Verse 36. "Say ye him whom the Father has sanctified and sent into the world, you blaspheme because I said, I'm the Son of God? If I do not do the works of my Father, believe me not. But if you do, though you believe not me, believe the works, that you may know and believe that the Father is in me and I in him." He says, if you can't see that I'm Christ, that I'm the Messiah, if you can't see that, then you just need to go around and start checking the works again. The blind see, the lame walk, people are fed, lives are changed, disease is healed constantly. Just check all of that stuff. Could you give glory to God for that? Some people, it doesn't matter if mountains get moved right in front of their eyes. They're just in their own little world, won't get out. Just can't believe, can't do nothing. "Therefore they sought to take him, but he escaped out of their hand. He went away to the Jordan, where John was baptizing, and he stayed there. But many followed out, and many believed on him there." They got out of the city. They got out away from the Jewish leadership, the common people. And when they came out, they had an opportunity. They said, "We really know who you are. We believe you're the Christ." And many believed. And this is all out of the text of what we've been looking at today. In 160 BC, Judas was killed in a battle, and his brother Jonathan would take over. Jonathan, like his brothers, had victories. He's abolished the Syrian taxes. However, a rival Syrian king made an offer for Jonathan to bid for the throne of Israel, and he was open to this and came away purchasing the title King of Judah and King, or the High Priest. Now, all of a sudden, here's the breakaway of the priesthood coming through the Levitical line and God's hand being upon it. Now it's being sold, and it's sad that one of the Maccabeans, one of the boys, that went to his head, and he bought a title that you can be king of Israel, you can be king of Judah, and at the same time you can be the high priest too. What a racket. You can tell people what to do, you can tell them where to worship, and you can hear their confessions, and you could do this, and I mean, you can control it all. You're number one. Far different than when Jesus was saying, "I and my Father are one." Jesus Christ is number one. But this whole thing went to his head. The consequences of the change of the priesthood was great, was immense. And we're only a couple brothers into the Maccabeans. But it was a sellout. And what happened? The priesthood became political and thus gave birth to a political party, the Sadducees. We would read in the Bible and we'd come across the Sadducees and we would call them religious. And they would want you to call them religious because they were the ones that took care and they asked for and they got the temple area. They controlled they controlled the political arm of all of Judaism and the religion around the temple. What went on at the temple was law throughout the land. And it was here that the Sanhedrin, the group of 70, came out of this group, and this is the group that crucified Jesus down the road. Anything to do with the temple and the Temple Mount in the Bible, in the New Testament, Sadducees. Just remember that. Sadducees. From this group came that. Now, the former scribes, because of this, the former scribes and priests, they were outside, out in the cities and the towns and wherever they were, outside of the temple, even in Jerusalem and other areas of the city. They had synagogues, they had followings, they had groups. They weren't Sadducees, they were Pharisees. And this group became that Pharisees, and they were very conservative. And to the point they went wild and went overboard. By the time Jesus was walking, they were very legalistic. And that's what they were trying to pin on Jesus, that he wasn't letter of the law. You healed on the Sabbath. Oh, you sinner. And they would die for that. But this group didn't go to the temple. They stayed away from it. It wasn't their turf. In a lot of ways, the Pharisees could have controlled the people because they walked out around and among them. They had the major population. They had the outskirts. If there was a vote taken, they would have one hand down. Can somebody find me a cup of water? Carol, can you find me water? Thank you. But this was tragic that this came out of that. And so now the priesthood is basically destroyed, and it's just a position. It's a control position, control people. Yes? Maybe. Let her lie. I may come back for it. Thank you. Thank you, hon. Number 4. Hang on, I get to celebrate. This is my countdown celebration. You have been good. We've gone from 10, 9, 8, and 7, and 6, and 5. Here's 4. Mathan. He was born in this time era, in 145 BC. Okay, we'll move on. Back to the Maccabees, not this guy, but he was killed by the Syrians in 143 BC. The last brother alive quickly picked up the leadership role, Simon. And after Simon drove out the Syrians out of Jerusalem, he reached an agreement with Demetrius, who is now the king. Antiochus Epiphanes is gone. I should have told you where he died and what. They make an agreement, and they have national peace with Israel. It's restored, and so now all of a sudden, the northern Seleucid Empire, the Syrian Empire, it's becoming, is at peace with Israel, and everything, quote, is okay. But Simon dies in 134 BC, and we are 33 years away from Mattathias, the dad. The Maccabean period comes to an end. In a lot of ways, looking back, there's huge accomplishments here. But there's some terrible, terrible giveaways, aren't there? Giveaways that they've just given away. They've given away the biblical structure, God's program for God's people. They're going to lose sight of all of that. And all they're going to be is what Jesus called the religious leaders of the day. They were whited sepulchres. They looked great. They could paint themselves up real good on the outside. But he said, you're filled with dead bones on the end. inside. And that's what the priesthood became, for the most part. Now, there were those that believed and wanted to do right and would do right as far as they could, but the leadership was really pretty bad. The grandsons of Mattathias, who started it all, would pick up the torch and become the next Jewish leaders. So you have Dad, Mattathias, you have the 5 boys. Now you have the kids of those 5 boys, and they would pick up and go from there. However, this would start to be called the Hasmonean Empire because the grandkids have married outside into other clans, and there's other people within that entire clan that's just jumping in, not all Maccabees. So that's what it is. And it'll last, this time zone will be 71 years, but it will go quick. This period is from the Hasmon family name, as I just said. Let me move on. Here's a transition and timeline, and this is total boring, and let me get off of this as fast as I can, okay? You can go and learn all this yourself and have a good time. Here's the Hasmonean high priests and kings because they're now together. Now they are together. They bought it, they live it, and look at the countdown as it goes. You've got Jonathan Maccabeus and Simon Maccabeus. These are the guys that bought it out first. Then John Hyrcanus the first. Aristobulus, he was also a king. And Alexander Jannaeus, also a king. And they reigned in Israel. They reigned over the Jews. They took care of the temple with the Sadducees. And life went on peacefully, basically. It keeps dropping down. Here's a woman that was a queen. Wow, high priest is a queen. That's good. And here's John Hyrcanus II. He was a high priest for that time, a king for that time. He was governor of the people for that time. And then he was like the monarch or the leader over Judea in that slot. Aristobulus II, Antigonus. The beliefs, watch this. This is the summary. This is what you need to take away, okay? The beliefs of the Maccabees was this. They fought for the freedom of the Jews, for the freedom of their religion, of their political system, and of their common everyday life. To go back and to do exactly what God wanted them to do in the Old Testament and live for the Lord. By the time it got back, they were gone, it had backslidden and it had slid into the Hasmonean time period. And they basically, the takeaway is they were very personal. They had political agendas. Their lives sprung out of the Hellenistic culture. It wasn't the first group. It was about people turning to God. To the Hasmoneans, it was about, I am God. I am king. What can I get out of this? How big of an empire can I build? What can I keep to myself? And so the system is gone of what God designed at this point, but that's not the rest of the story. John Hyrcanus, this was Simon Maccabeus' son. He was a leader. He is cruel. And number 3 pops in. Jacob, 99 BC. Ooh, we're under 100. It's Jacob, 99 BC. We have continued growth of the Pharisees who aligned themselves with the Maccabees. The Hasmoneans would identify with the Sadducees, who are now more powerful. And all the Hasmoneans, they just were known for a family, a group of people that was just lusted for power. Antipater, an Idumean from Idumea, died, that he was on the list in 43 BC. He was a political opportunist, became the leader of the rich Jews, had great influence on the Hasmonean leaders. He would become the father of Herod. You know him as Herod the Great. I do. Now we're getting sort of close, aren't we? Now it's coming down. The self-centeredness caused turmoil. The greed of Hyrcanus was succeeded by his brother Aristobulus, started a civil war. Those are all listed in that list. I told you this is the boring section. This is some of the stuff that went on. And so there's a civil war started. And here's where it really comes down. The Roman general, all of a sudden, Rome has been increasing power, but has not had no influence on Israel, all is well. But then the Roman general Pompey hears of this chaos and say, things are in turmoil. Rome can extend her borders now even greater. And he comes to Israel and he defeats them. He destroys a lot of the city. He ruins the temple. Uses great military might against the Jews. You see, the Romans were like this. If you just do what we say, you're okay. But if you step out of line, they were the most fierce and came down the hardest. There generally wasn't any, you get to go to jail and come out. It was generally, if your crime wasn't super bad, you went to jail. You're a slave. You're out in the chain gangs. You're that. If it's bad, you're killed. So they didn't have a lot of uprisings, and if they did, that's the way that they would put them down. They would come fiercely upon a people. Israel then became a Roman province, and it ended the Hasmonean Empire. Next week we start the Romans, and this is a good chance to stop right here. I rushed from